I think one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is that cheating is usually not even the first red flag. I feel like people act like betrayal comes out of nowhere, and a lot of the times that's not the case. A lot of the times there were smaller things before, because seeing the good in somebody is not a bad thing. But sometimes we get so focused on seeing the good that we stop evaluating it as a whole picture. What's up, y'all? It's your girl Zaria Shante, period, and I'm back with another video. Before we hop into this video, make sure I like, comment, and subscribe, give this video a share, and let's get into it. So y'all, I was really sitting here thinking, and I'm like, I gotta be honest with myself about something. I ignore red flags. And before y'all get in the comments talk about girls stand up, hear me out, because I think that people have this idea that when people ignore red flags, it's because they're naive, desperate, or just don't know no better. But I don't think that's always true. I think that a lot of us see red flags as clear as day, but we just don't want them to mean what they mean, and that's the difference. I've been in situations where I saw the red flags immediately, and I mean immediately. But instead of accepting what I was seeing, I just started to explain it away, like explain the behavior. Like, oh, maybe I'm just overthinking, maybe they just having a bad day, maybe I'm being too sensitive, maybe I need to be more understanding. And then before you know it, it's like you've talked yourself out of your own intuition. Not because you didn't see it, but because you wanted a different outcome. And I honestly feel like that's something that people do not talk about enough. One thing that I've learned is that attraction will have you negotiating with things that you wouldn't even begin to accept on paper. Because like if your friend came to you and described the exact same situation, you'd be like, oh girl, no, like absolutely not, like leave. But when it's you, now all of a sudden you're giving grace. Now you're trying to see every perspective. Now you're being understanding. Now you're waiting for potential. And potential has gotten a lot of us in trouble because potential is not reality. Potential is who somebody could be. Reality is who they're choosing to be right now. Like, have y'all ever had that one friend when you're telling them something and they just looking at you the whole time like, girl, and you know exactly what they're thinking, and you know they right. You know that if the roles were reversed and they were telling you the exact same story, you'll be looking at them the exact same way. But because you like the person and because you care about the person, because you're emotionally invested, suddenly now you're like an offense attorney. Now you're explaining everything, talking about, no, but you don't understand. No, but they're actually a really good person. No, but they've been through a lot. No, but they didn't mean it like that. It's like now you're working overtime trying to provide context for a situation that nobody ever even asked for. And that's the thing about feelings. Feelings do not necessarily make you blind, but they can definitely make things look different. They can make red flags look a little lighter than what they actually are. And I honestly think I've done that at some point. Shoot, I mean, I think we've all done that at some point. Another thing that I've had to learn is that chemistry and compatibility are not the same things. And I wish that somebody would have explained that to me earlier, because just because you connect with somebody does not mean that they are necessarily good for you. Just because the conversation flows does not mean that y'all two are aligned. And just because you have feelings does not mean that they are healthy. You can have amazing chemistry with somebody and still spend half your time confused. You can have amazing chemistry with somebody and still not trust them. You can have amazing chemistry with somebody and still not feel emotionally safe. And for a long time, I think that I confused chemistry with compatibility. Now, let's talk about something else. The difference between intuition and insecurity. Because, this one will have you in a chokehold. Especially if you've been hurt before. If you've ever been lied to, disappointed, cheated on, betrayed, it becomes really hard to notice whether you're picking up on something or reacting based off of something that you've been through before. Because sometimes your intuition is trying to protect you, but sometimes your fear is trying to protect you too. And they can honestly sound very similar. So what I've started trying to pay attention to is this. Is their actual behavior making me uncomfortable? Or am I creating a story with no evidence? Because those are two different things. If there's behavior, that's information. If there's secrecy, that's information. If there are inconsistencies, that's information. Which actually brings me to another point on how actions are not built through words. Trust is built through actions. Anybody could tell you who they are. Anybody could make promises. Anybody could say what sounds good. Now the question is, what is it that they consistently do? Because consistency will tell you more than speech ever could. And honestly, I think one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is that cheating is usually not even the first red flag. I feel like people act like betrayal comes out of nowhere, and a lot of the times that's not the case. A lot of the times there were smaller things before. Broken boundaries, half-truths, inconsistencies, things that made you uncomfortable that you talked yourself out of paying attention to. And I think that's why so many people feel blindsided when something major happens. Because when the big thing happens, you're focused on the big thing. You're focused on the cheating, you're focused on the betrayal, you're focused on whatever that huge event was. But when you really sit down and think about it, there are probably smaller moments before. Moments where your spirit was trying to tell you that something just wasn't sitting right. Maybe it was an inconsistency. Maybe it was secrecy. Maybe it was a boundary that kept getting crossed. Maybe it was just something that felt off, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. And I'm not saying that every uncomfortable feeling means that somebody is doing something wrong. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is sometimes we get little pieces of information along the way that we talk ourselves out of paying attention to. Then when something bigger happens, we look back and realize that those smaller moments were trying to tell us something all along. Not always, but more often than what we like to admit. Especially when you cared about somebody. Especially when you wanted it to work out. Especially when you saw the good in them. Because seeing the good in somebody is not a bad thing. But sometimes we get so focused on seeing the good that we stop evaluating it as a whole picture. And here's probably the biggest thing that I've learned. You cannot love somebody into treating you right. I don't care how patient you are. I don't care how understanding you are. I don't care how much potential you see. You cannot love somebody into becoming who they need to be. They would have to want that for themselves. And I think a lot of us stay longer because we fall in love with the potential of who somebody could be and not who they actually are. And that's a painful lesson because hope feels good. Hope says maybe it'll get better. Hope says maybe they just need time. Hope says maybe if I just hold on just a little bit longer. But eventually reality has to matter too. And honestly, the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that my red flag isn't that I don't see red flags. I see them. And that's the crazy part. I notice when something feels off. I notice inconsistencies. I notice when somebody's words and actions aren't matching. I notice all of it. My problem is that once I care for somebody, I become way more patient than I should. And patience sounds like a positive thing until it's not. Because there's a difference between being patient and being in denial. There's a difference between giving somebody grace and continuously making excuses for them. There's a difference between understanding somebody and abandoning yourself. And I think that's where I've gotten stuck before. Because once I care about someone, I start looking at them through the lens of who they could be, not necessarily who they're choosing to be. I start focusing on the good moments, the connections, the memories, the potential, the version of them that I believe exists underneath everything else. And if I'm being real, sometimes potential is the exact thing that keeps us stuck. Because potential feels hopeful. Potential says, just give it more time. Potential says, maybe things will be different next month. Potential says, maybe they're just going through something right now. And before you know it, you've spent months or maybe even years holding on to who somebody could be instead of focusing on who they consistently are. And that's a hard truth. Because I honestly don't think that most people ignore red flags because they're dumb. I don't think that people ignore red flags because they're desperate. I think a lot of people ignore red flags because there's hope. And hope can be a beautiful thing. But hope can also have you sitting in situations longer than you should. Because, I mean, you want your investment to mean something. You want your patience to pay off. You want the story to end differently. And sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And one thing I'm learning is that love does not change people. Potential does not change people. Patience does not change people. People change when they decide that they want to change. And that's a lesson that I've had to learn over and over and over and over again. So when I say I ignore red flags, I don't mean that I don't see them. I mean that sometimes I see them and convince myself that they're not actually as bad as they are. I soften them. I explain them away. I repaint them. And that's something that I'm actively working on. Because at some point, protecting your peace has to become more important than protecting your hope. So yeah, I ignore red flags. Or at least I have. But these days, I'm just trying to trust what I see the first time instead of arguing with myself about it. And if I'm being honest, I think that's where self-love really starts. Not when you stop loving other people, but when you stop abandoning yourself in order to keep loving them. So y'all let me know in the comments, what's a red flag that you saw immediately but convinced yourself that it was not a big deal? And be honest, because apparently we're all a little colorblind when our feelings get involved. Thank y'all for watching. I'm gonna see y'all in the next video. Bye.